Hello, welcome. I am Nicole Masu, and this is episode 1 of my She Reads series, because she reads. Okay, so in this episode, I'm going to talk about 3 of my favorite books. I don't know if I would say that they're like my top favorite books of all time personally, but if you came over to my house and you asked me like, hey Nicole, like recommend me some books, like I'm down bad and I need something that'll, I don't know, help me feel more comfort in this life, these are the 3 books that I would recommend. The first one is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. The second one is Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. And the third one is A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. So I'm just going to go through those 3 books and I'm going to talk about them and talk about why I love them, what they did for me. Yeah. And also, if you look at my Instagram, you can see that I've already talked about these 3 books on there briefly. Just a quick little paragraph for each book. But I'll just like expand on them a little bit more. So let me go get them. Okay. So I have the 3 books right here. So let's see. I would recommend reading them in the order that I recommend. Just because I feel like each one kind of levels up a little bit, but it's up to you. All right. So the first one is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. I love Brene Brown so much. I first discovered her on an episode of Oprah's Super Soul Sunday. When I was in high school is when Oprah's Super Soul Sunday was like really popular and taking off with a lot of episodes. And honestly, I feel like I was the only high schooler watching Super Soul Sunday every single Sunday, just because I love Oprah. She's my favorite. And, that show really helped me think about things more deeply, think about things more spiritually. And it was such a feel-good show, and I would just not be the same person if I didn't consume that kind of content when I was a teenager. So yeah, she had Brene Brown on, and Brene Brown was talking about this book, which made me go and buy this book, which, let me see. Daring Greatly, How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead. So yeah, Brene Brown is really, 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 really awesome. Oh, you can barely see it. But she doesn't just kind of write about her own personal theories. My chair is squeaky, so it's going to squeak. She doesn't just write about her own personal theories. She researches all of these topics, and all of her stuff is researched. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I really appreciate that because it feels a little bit more like real to me, all the stuff that she's talking about. And I've actually read this book twice. The second time I read it was with my partner. And it is just really, 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 really awesome. She talks about how important it is to lean into vulnerability, and that how it's not a weakness, but it's a strength, and how it can actually transform your life and give you more love in your life. And whew, yeah, she's really, 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 really cool. She basically also kind of makes the case for being a courageous person, and how important it is to do things that are a little scary, to be brave. But I definitely recommend reading the book. I feel like she started kind of coining the term vulnerability, and then that term started being used in the zeitgeist more and being overused and used by people who haven't read the book and misused by people all the time. So if it interests you, I would really highly suggest you read it because, she doesn't just talk about, oh, be vulnerable, be vulnerable, be vulnerable. She talks about, also using your own discernment with who you're vulnerable with, right? You don't just be vulnerable with anybody. Be vulnerable with people who deserve it, who have earned it, and who have earned your trust over time. And she talks about that in this book as well, of how to kind of discern between who to share yourself with and who to maybe, not. This book changed my life in a lot of ways because it really put into very clear words the life that I try to live anyway, like doing the scary thing, doing the thing that, tickles you a little bit and makes you nervous a little bit and leaning into those moments. And I would say that for me, like, it's been really beneficial in my life with regards to attracting the love I want in my life, with regards to going on travels, traveling alone, doing things alone. Doing brave things in career, in love, in life. Oh my gosh. So this right here is one of my favorite things that I learned from this book and that I try to repeat to as many people as I can. So this is on page 11, right at the beginning. She talks about wholehearted living, and how she defines that and how we can practice that sort of living. And one of the things that she says here that it's just so beautiful. So I'll just read it. It's on page 11. If you roughly divide the men and women I've interviewed into two groups, those who feel a deep sense of love and belonging and those who struggle for it, there's only one variable that separates the groups. Those who feel lovable, who love, and who experience belonging, simply believe they are worthy of love and belonging. They don't have better or easier lives. They don't have fewer struggles with addiction or depression, and they haven't survived fewer traumas or bankruptcies or divorces. But in the midst of all these struggles, they have developed practices that enable them to hold on to the belief that they are worthy of love, belonging, and joy. And that, I think, is so huge and important. And that's something that I notice in my friends out here who are dating, especially some of my girlfriends, and people I know in my life who do struggle to find that sense of love and belonging in their life. And, everyone's always thinking like, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do to get that? And all you have to do is believe that you are worthy of it. And this is what the research tells us. And I just think that's so huge, right? You don't have to be more beautiful. You don't have to be skinnier. You don't have to go to the gym however many times a week. You don't have to make more money, right? As long as you actually truly believe that you are worthy of being loved, and that you are worthy of being here on this planet, then that love will be attracted to you. And that's something that I personally feel like I've experienced in my life, especially when it comes to romantic relationships and dating. I feel like I know 100% sure that I deserve someone who treats me like a princess and a queen. And it was me knowing that I deserve that attracted that in my life. So yeah, that's definitely something that I really, really loved from this book. So this is also a good one. I'm on page 45. I feel like I need to mention this because of what I said before about how the term vulnerability has been overused in our culture and misused so much, to the point where, people are starting to push back from it. But here she really clarifies. Let me see. Okay, so one line of questioning that I often get is about our let it all hang out culture. Can't there be too much vulnerability? Isn't there such a thing as oversharing? These questions are inevitably followed by examples from celebrity culture. What about when movie star X tweeted about her husband's suicide attempt? Or what about reality TV stars who share the intimate details of their lives and their children's lives with the world? Vulnerability is based on mutuality and requires boundaries and trust. It's not oversharing, it's not purging, it's not indiscriminate disclosure, and it's not celebrity-style social media information dumps. Vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them. Being vulnerable and open is mutual and an integral part of the trust-building process. So I love that she says that, and she clarifies it, and she goes into even more detail about that in the book. And that's such an important distinction. Oh gosh. Yeah. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more about vulnerability and what the research says about it, please read the entire book before you just start practicing these things without knowing much about them, for sure, because it's not oversharing and it's not purging, right? It's sharing with those who have earned it. And she talks a lot in this book about trust building and about how to build trust and, how that's built over time with people. And, trust is, and I think she says this in the book, or I'm pretty sure she says this in the book, but she basically says that trust is not about, big moments, and people doing big gestures. Sometimes it's about little moments over a large span of time. It's about noticing like, that person said something and then they did what they said, right? Those little things are what build trust with us, right? She describes this example called the marble jar example, where, and when someone does something tiny, right, they remember your birthday, or they, do something really nice for you. They remember something that you said. They show up when they say they're going to show up to your party or, they text you back or whatever, like those little tiny things, over time, it's a little marble, right? Every little thing is a marble in the jar. And then over time, you'll have a lot of marbles in the jar. And that's how you build trust. And she describes it a lot better than I just did. But yeah, girl, I take this off when I be reading books because it's so annoying. I used to be like a hardcover girl, and now I'm a softcover girly because it's just like, who wants to do that? Ooh, she also talks a lot in this book about shame, which is so important to talk about. She talks about why it's harmful to shame ourselves and to shame other people, and how it's actually just like not conducive to the results that we want in our life. So definitely, if you have a lot of shame, this is definitely the book for you. Ooh, shame thrives on secret keeping. And when it comes to secrets, there's some serious science behind the 12-step program saying you're only as sick as your secrets. And I love that she says that, right? Like one of the ways to combat shame is to speak it out loud and to say it out loud and to say like, and I think this is a part of just being an honest person and practicing honesty in general, right? Is if there's something, it's okay that if you're scared to say, I'm scared, right? It's okay if you're unsure to say, I'm unsure. And I don't know. These are little things that I've always kind of noticed and picked up on when I'm like around new people. I really am observant and I pay attention to how honest they are and how they talk about themselves, and you know, if they're trying to act like everything's good, or if they're honest and they're like, oh man, that sucks, oh man, that hurt my feelings, oh man, whatever. Like, that's so important, and it's a practice too, right? Especially in our culture that like rewards us like being dishonest and chauvinistic, and yeah. Whew. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to share about this book so far. Highly, highly recommend. You know, I really think if you were to come to my house and ask me to recommend you books that could help you lead a more loving life, I would definitely say the first step would be to figure out how to show up in this world authentically, how to be brave and how to be courageous and vulnerable, and how to combat that shame that exists within all of us. And so this book would definitely be the first step. Okay. Second book that I'm recommending is Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Or is it Harari? I'm not 100% sure. Wow, it's hard to see. Okay, so Sapiens is a brief history of humankind. This book is a little bit different than the last book. It's a bit different than the last book. Barack Obama has a little review of it in the back. Bill Gates, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Like, it's very popular. I'm sure you've heard of it before. Wow, this book was like, it just like unlocked a different part of my brain. Basically, I would say it's like an anthropological perspective on human beings and humankind. I know anthropology is a problematic science. But I don't know. I can't think of another word to describe. Basically, the study of human beings as a human species is what I would say. And this was very helpful for me with regards to looking at us as human beings almost from like a zoo perspective. You know, and studying us like an animal. In a way, it sort of made me take being a human being and human beings in general, like, less personally. Okay, like, what if an alien were to come to planet Earth and try to study human beings like any other animal? What would they notice? What would they write about? You know, that very, like, objective, non-personal way of kind of looking at us as a species. And I really, really love that because, you know, I think as I've gotten older, especially as a Black woman in America, you know, and like the more I learn about history and about, you know, and I'm seeing all of these injustices in the world and blah, 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 right? I can often get really down about these things and like upset. And I don't know, there's something really comforting about learning about us as a species from an outsider's perspective, because I'm just realizing that we're just human beings who are emotional and smart and intelligent and emotional, and this is just the product of us being emotional beings. Like, anyway, let me and then he basically goes through like human beings from the beginning, right? Like when we evolved into Homo sapiens and I'm burping. When we evolved into Homo sapiens up until now, and the different revolutions we've gone through. So he talks about the cognitive revolution in part 1. the agricultural revolution, the unification of humankind, and the scientific revolution. So he goes through the whole history of human beings. But what I like about this is that, like, she's thick. She's a thick boy. But it's not, like, difficult to understand. Like, he's very good at wording things in a way that's easy to understand, easy to digest, but then also, like, very clear. And then, yeah, another thing I like about him is he poses a lot of really, like, poignant questions, you know, and he tries to make you think about us in a different way than, you know, I've ever thought about us. So one of my favorite things in this book is on page 80. He talks about the agricultural revolution through the viewpoint of wheat. So wheat, like, you know, like wheat bread, wheat. So 10,000 years ago, wheat was just a wild grass, one of many, confined to a small range in the Middle East. Suddenly, within just a few short millennia, it was growing all over the world. According to the basic evolutionary criteria of survival and reproduction, wheat has become one of the most successful plants in the history of the earth. Basically, he talks about how wheat became one of the most successful plants in the earth. So he says that wheat did it by manipulating Homo sapiens to its advantage. This ape, us, had been living a fairly comfortable life hunting and gathering until about 10,000 years ago, but then began to invest more and more effort in cultivating wheat. Within a couple of millennia, humans in many parts of the world were doing little from dawn to dusk other than taking care of wheat plants. It wasn't easy. Wheat demanded a lot of them. Wheat didn't like rocks and pebbles, so sapiens broke their backs clearing fields. Wheat didn't like sharing its space, water, and nutrients with other plants, so men and women labored long days weeding under the scorching sun. Wheat got sick, so sapiens had to keep watch out for worms and blight. The body of Homo sapiens had not evolved for such tasks. It was adapted to climbing apple trees and running after gazelles, not to clearing rocks and carrying water buckets. Human spines, knees, and necks and arches paid the price. Studies of ancient skeletons indicate that the transition to agriculture brought about a plethora of ailments, such as slipped discs, arthritis, and hernias. So that, oh man, I'm like remembering reading this now. So basically, yeah, he talks about kind of like what human beings were evolved to do, but then what we've now created our society to look like, right? So we were not evolved to do all this back-breaking work. We're not evolved to work a 40-hour work week, right? We weren't evolved for these things. But because of our fear of not finding food, us growing tired of looking for food all the time, we've tried to create these systems that have like a bit more of like guarantee, but it comes at a cost. So yeah, he also talks about in here like the evolution of money, the evolution of religion was very fascinating. Like how we evolved from like being believing in many gods to believing in one, and like how capitalism started and like why it's continued. Like it's really, 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 really good. Yeah, highly recommend. I recommend this because I think it's really helpful for us who are struggling emotionally, especially for us minorities who are struggling with the pain and heartache of the injustices that we suffer. There's something about taking a little bit of a step back and seeing how it all happened. It brought me comfort. So, I would hope it would bring you some comfort too. Yeah. And Yuval is a queer Israeli man. So we love that. All right. And the last book is A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. Awakening to Your Life's Purpose. Woo! Okay, so this book Eckhart Tolle was on Oprah. Go figure. And she loved him in this book so much that she did like a 10 episode series on this book, because this book has 10 chapters. She goes through every chapter one by one. I do want to reread this book with my partner after I'm done reading the like 6 books on my nightstand. And this book, it gave me so much existential comfort. Like, I was not expecting. The first time I heard Oprah recommending this book, I don't know, I just wasn't like really too drawn into Eckhart Tolle as a person. He's not the most like charismatic person, I guess you could say. Like, he's not like the most like exciting person to listen to, right? Like, you have to be really into like the words that he's saying and like what he's talking about and familiar with his work to kind of get into it. I'm not gonna lie. However, the book was so great. This book, he talks about, awakening to your life's purpose. What I took away from this book the most was everything he says about ego. And ego versus progressing our consciousness. So like kind of like ego and consciousness is what he gets into. So like really deep spiritual knowledge is in this book for sure. I think no matter what your religion is, I think this book would be very, very helpful in aiding your existential relationship with the world. I feel like whenever I like use the word spiritual with people, I try not to use that word, but because everybody interprets that word so differently. And what I mean by spiritual is basically an acknowledgement of the fact that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, an acknowledgement of our connection with all living things, and with each other, and an acknowledgement with a connection with the universe or God or the world or love or whatever you want to call it. But this book like made me feel more comfortable in my human experience. I think for a long time I would be stressed and worried about where my life was going and if it's going to go to the place where I want it to go, right? And, and I would stress about the, outside forces and structures that were holding me back from achieving the life that I wanted, right? And this book just made me realize that, I am a human being who was born in the 90s, who, didn't choose that, but this is the time that I'm born. And, I have opportunities to make the world better for the next generation as best I can. And, there will be things that I won't be able to accomplish and do, and that's okay, right? That doesn't mean to give up and die and curl up and be angry at the world. It just means that this is the time that you are here, and as long as you do your best, you'll be okay. And it just is what it is. Basically, this taught me it is what it is. Like, that's basically what I learned in these 10 chapters is like all these different ways to think about the phrase, it is what it is, and to have acceptance for that. And to not only have acceptance, but to have joy and excitement, because our lives are short and long at the same time, and who knows what the future holds. And as long as you're striving towards progressing the collective consciousness, like, you will have riches in your life, period, right? Like, it's not lonely in Babylon type stuff. After I read this book, okay, so I'm gonna say something like really personal, but I've known for a long, long time, like, what my main life goals are and what I want, what I care about, what I want to accomplish, what I want to achieve. And my number one life goal has always been to have children and to have a family. More specifically, have bio kids with someone who loves me and with a boy who is just super sweet, basically. And like, that goal of mine was one that has given me a lot of anxiety over the years because, dating is hard. I mean, listen, for me, there's a difference between who I'm hooking up with and who I see as a potential partner, and I'm able to very easily compartmentalize the two. So I'm talking about like who I can see as a potential partner. And as far as the men who fall into that category, it was so hard to find those men, right? Like, I felt like no man was living up to my high expectations, which are, I don't know, you can't be homophobic. We need to have a similar worldview. You need to read a book. You need to, you know what I'm saying? Like, you need to be like committed to being as good of a person as I'm committed to being, right? Committed to being a better person every day, to self-reflection, self-examination, right? Like, and as a straight woman, I found this so difficult to find in straight men. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Yeah, and I just could not find that. And I was having such a hard time. And then the whole thing about like biological clock and blah, blah, blah. Like, I had to really sit with myself and, tell myself that, because I would stress and I would get so sad. And any romantic relationship that didn't work out, it just made me even sadder, right? And then on top of that, I'm a Black woman in America, right? We're the least likely to get married. We're the most likely to be swiped left on dating apps. We're the least desired, right? And so there's that too, of feeling like, damn, like, can I not achieve this because I'm not a white woman or an Asian woman, and so that was something that really stressed me out for a very long time. And I would just feel like that constant yearning and want. And I would feel like just constantly heartbroken, like in my own self though. Right. And what this book did was help me make peace with however my life's going to turn out. Right. It really, really helped me make peace with that, because it taught me that I am but another person in this world who's having a life, and not everyone gets everything, and that's okay, right? And you can still find meaning and you can still find love, especially if you're committed to your life's purpose, and especially if you're committed to progressing the collective consciousness. And so after I read this book, I 100% made peace with the idea of my life, my future life, not having children in it. which, I mean, kind of sounds silly. Maybe for people who don't want kids, they're like, okay, big deal. But for me, it was really hard. And so I was finally able to imagine my life in the future, not having kids and being a single baddie and still being able to find love and meaning in my life. I was finally able to fully imagine that and to fully accept it. And I finally made peace with that. And that was so powerful for me because it gave me so much more freedom, right? It gave me so much more freedom to be myself, more freedom to, just be happy with whatever love that I do get in my life, right? And to not be like, oh, well, this guy doesn't want me in this specific way, so, I hate that. Like, no, like, this guy wants to be in my life in this specific way and give me love in this specific way. That's a beautiful thing, right? Like, period. And yeah. Anyway, and then the crazy thing is that I then, after I read this book and I made peace with however my life turns out, I went on Instagram and I posted about my 3 favorite books, the ones that we're talking about today. And the guy that I'm currently with, that was the post that made him slide in my DMs. And now I'm being loved on way more than I could ever imagine. So Eckhart Tolle, like, he's really good at describing these deeper concepts. But the way that he writes, he's very, like, repetitive, not in a bad way, but repetitive in a good way with regards to these deeper concepts so that you're able to really, really understand it. So it's one of those books that, like, as you continue reading, you understand deeper and deeper and deeper and more and more. It's really, really great. So the first chapter in this little section, he talks about freeing ourselves from labels. And I just thought that was really great because he basically says that, the knowledge of the universe is so much greater than our understanding for it, right? So there's the knowledge of the universe, and then there's our understanding for it. And then our understanding of the universe is so much greater than the words we have to describe it, right? And so the words that we have are so much smaller than our understanding, which is so much smaller than the actual knowledge of the universe, right? And so it's one of those things that, like, words are helpful till they aren't. And that, it kind of reminds me of, like, vulnerability with Brene Brown, because, and how that word was overused and misused, because the meaning of vulnerability has to be understood in here. It has to be understood in a deep way, not just by using these words and throwing them around whenever we feel like it. So he says, when you don't cover up the world with words and labels, a sense of the miraculous returns to your life that was lost a long time ago when humanity, instead of using thought, became possessed by thought. A depth returns to your life. Things regain their newness, their freshness. And the greatest miracle is the experiencing of your essential self as prior to any words, thoughts, mental labels, and images. For this to happen, you need to disentangle yourself of I, of beingness, from all the things it has become mixed up with. That is to say, identified with. That disentanglement is what this book is about. So he talks about that a lot, I and ego, and what it means to not attach so many things to your identity. It's really great. It's really deep. I would say that the way he describes the ego is kind of like what we identify with, but in our thoughts are like more so our obsessive thoughts, and what we feel like is attached to our being and attached to who we are, when in fact we are not our thoughts. We are merely the consciousness that is perceiving our thoughts, right? And so how do we not take our own thoughts personally and not just feel like the world is just always about what we're thinking, and how do we take a step back and observe our thoughts and observe that, oh, we're a human being that has thoughts and has emotions, as opposed to taking all of that personally. He also describes the ego as like us attaching ourselves to form, which is like things of this world, right? So us attaching ourselves to our body or our face or our accomplishments, and basically anything that can be taken away from you, right? What can't be taken away from you is your inner consciousness, right? The thing that's beyond your thoughts and your body, right? But all of those other things can be taken away from you. Your accomplishments, your beauty, your body, your ability to move, and what happens when we attach ourselves to those things is that we can become like very depressed when we don't have those things anymore. Not saying that it's wrong to be sad about losing those things, but to realize that those things are not you and that you is something deeper than that. I know, it's a little woo-woo. Let me see. Here he talks about non-reaction to the ego. So he says, non-reaction to the ego and others is one of the most effective ways, not only of going beyond ego in yourself, but also of dissolving the collective human ego. But you can only be in a state of non-reaction if you can recognize someone's behavior as coming from the ego, as being an expression of the collective human dysfunction. When you realize it's not personal, there's no longer a compulsion to react as if it were. By not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others, which is the unconditioned consciousness as opposed to the conditioned. So I think this is something a lot of us know, right? The idea that like, if someone is, I don't know, being mean or crass or egoic in any way, we don't need to react to it, right? We don't need to snap back. We don't need to respond. We don't need to, because all that's going to do is feed into it, right? And bring out the ego in yourself. And how much power there is in not reacting. So I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this. I definitely have, of just like, if someone says something a little crazy, just let it sit and don't say anything, and it makes people a little bit more sane. Ooh, oh my God, wait, this is a good one. So this is in the chapter called Role Playing. In the early stages of many so-called romantic relationships, role playing is quite common in order to attract and keep whoever is perceived by the ego as one who is going to make me happy, make me feel special, and fulfill all my needs. I'll play who you want me to be, and you'll play who I want you to be. That's the unspoken and unconscious agreement. However, role-playing is hard work, and so those roles cannot be sustained indefinitely, especially once you start living together. When those roles slip, what do you see? Unfortunately, in most cases, not yet the true essence of that being, but that which covers up the true essence. The raw ego divested of its roles, with its pain body, and its thwarted wanting, which now turns into anger, most likely directed at the spouse or partner for having failed to remove the underlying fear and sense of lack that is an intrinsic part of the egoic sense of self. Need I say more? That was something that I've always hated whenever I see in relationships, and that I never wanted in my own, was feeling like I'm playing a role for you. Because no, I'm my own human being, and I'm myself, and I'm authentic, and either you take that or you don't. That doesn't mean that I can't be committed to being a better person or to being kinder, or to being more loving. Actually the opposite, right? But what it does mean is that you don't own me and I don't own you, And I am not here to play house. I am here to grow spiritually and to become a better person. You feel me? Ooh, he talks about sexism in this book, and how that came to be, which is very, very interesting. He talks about racism, and he talks about what he terms pain body, which is basically the pain that we experience, and collective pain that we experience. He also talks about the power of being present, which he talks about in his earlier book, The Power of Now, but he goes over it briefly in this book as well. So I feel like if you're going to either read The Power of Now or this book, I would say to read A New Earth for sure. Those are the 3 books that I would recommend if you came over to my home. And thank you so much for watching and listening. Talk to you later. Bye.